What's going on, everybody? This is Black Men Sundays. I'm your host, Corey Sylvester Murray, and we're talking about generational wealth, mental health, finance, and business.
It's a Black Man Sunday. Time to put all childish things away. I refuse to be the man I was yesterday. Gotta put my best foot forward and elevate.
And before we introduce today's guest, my brother Eric Playa from Huntsville, aka Hunts Vegas, Alabama. Who do you have for our Black Men Sunday spotlight, my brother?
Hey, Corey, thanks for that wonderful introduction. My spotlight is on the first Black basketball team that actually won a national championship, which is actually Tennessee A&I, Tennessee Agriculture and Industrial State, which is now Tennessee State University in Nashville. Now, recently they had a visit to the White House. And the reason for this visit was because finally, after 65 years, they finally got the recognition of being observed, of being the first Black team, basketball team that won a national championship. This team from historically Black college and university to win a national championship, and the first team to win three, like let me say it again, three back-to-back championships back in 1957, 1958, and 1959. The former teammate, which is one of the surviving teammates, Mr. Barnett, George Finley, Ernest Jones, Henry Carlton, Robert Clark, and Ron Hamilton took part in this private ceremony in the Roosevelt Room of the White House, where Vice President Kamala Harris paid tribute to this team during a roundtable discussion. And just want to point them out. That's my spotlight for today. Corey, back to you.
You know, on Black Men Sundays, man, we're going to put the spotlights up on our social media handles. I think it's very important that people not just hear the spotlights when they listen, but be able to see it as well. So my brother Hunts Vegas, I appreciate that, man.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Let's go and introduce today's guest, man. We have Dre Griggs. This brother has a Bachelor of Science in Economics from Florida State University. That's in Tallahassee, by the way, where the other A&M is, Eric. This brother also has a master's in economics from Georgia Southern University. We're trying to retire in 5 years. I've heard a lot of brothers and sisters come on this show, quitting their jobs, being entrepreneurs. This brother's doing that. This brother here worked for New York Life Insurance Company. This brother here, we talking about Wisdometric Framework. What is that? We're going to have that conversation. This brother's also the president of Obsidian Wisdom. We're going to find out what that is. So without further ado, Dre Griggs, welcome to Black Men Sundays, brother. How you doing?
I'm excellent. Thank you for having me, Corey. I'm very thankful. It's going to be a great day.
Definitely. And, you know, I just want to warm you up with a couple easy questions. You know, when I was doing my research on you, one thing I kept saying, it says, live life on your own terms. A lot of brothers and sisters like, okay, that sounds great, but hold up. That Duke Bill dude, and I've had brothers and sisters come on our show and they said, Corey, I love what you're doing. I just don't think that's a reality for me. So let's warm up with that question.
I think that's a great question. It's a fair question. The numbers match it. About 76% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. 64% of Americans retire every day broke, which is about less than $5,000 in the bank account. And the majority of Americans have less than $1,000 saved at any given time, just sitting in an account. So it's the way I would describe it is there's a game being played, and some are winning and some are losing. So we have to figure out what the winners are doing so we can do that. I won't lie to your guests and say that it's a slam dunk that you can just quit everything and stop and be good in 1 year. You know, I tried that. It didn't work out for me. And then we'll probably get into that conversation. That I've learned that it takes a little bit longer than that. So maybe we have to have a 5-year plan. Maybe we have to have a 10-year plan. Can we put a plan together that will have you a millionaire in 5 to 10 years? I think that's very probable, very likely from the conversation we'll have today. Can I put a plan together that have you a millionaire in 1 year? I would say, well, we could put a plan together, but it's going to be a very difficult plan. So for most of us, I tell people start where you're at in the sense that how you spend your time defines your happiness. There's a book, it's called Happiness by Design. Long story short, it says your happiness is tied to how you spend your time, whether you spend it on pleasure or purpose. And if you spend enough of your time on those, you'll feel great. And so for us, it has to be like, well, I'm not going to put off everything. Well, oh, I would take more visits to my mom's house if I had my money right. I would volunteer if I had my money right. I would do all these things. I would say flip it. I would say visit your mom. I would say volunteer, and then you will feel happy along the journey where you can commit 5 years towards achieving this goal.
You quit your job in 2018, sold your home. Let's talk about that because I feel like, people when they say, "Oh, you can quit your job, you can quit your job, you can be an entrepreneur, you could be your own boss." Whatever work stress, whatever issues you may have had at the job. I'm not saying you had any. I'm just saying from a generalized perspective. A lot of people say that first 2 weeks when they quit their job, they're kind of like, wow, this is great. This is awesome. But then, like I said, those bills start kicking in.
It's
That
true.
check that you've had that comfortability with getting, you might have been talking trash, but that check was there every 2 weeks. Now that check ain't there. It's fully dependent on you being an entrepreneur. So let's talk about like the impetus of what made you, because I mean, you were you were in the investment bank accounting department for $1 billion company. So let's talk about that and how you got to where you are today. But we always got to take it back.
That's fair. I'm thankful that you asked. So it was a really rough year. So when I normally describe it, so when I first started, I said, I feel like I want to help people. I feel like I have this calling. My dad, he worked in the Department of Corrections. My mom worked for the school board. I just grew up in a house where helping others was big. Like that's what we always wanted to do. That's what we did, and so that's what I felt. And for me, making the money wasn't necessarily all of it. Obviously, I need to be able to pay the bills and things like that. Well, I had a very supportive wife who was like, "Man, if this is your calling, then quit the job and go for it." And I did not know any better. If I talk to people today, I tell them, "Do not quit your job unless you have gone through that gauntlet." What I mean is where you've at least replaced half of your active income from your opportunity and your entrepreneurship journey. And the reason is very simple. What we don't realize is the system has taught us to be employees from day one, where you go to school, you're taught to sit quietly, do your work, a bell dismisses you, you ask to go to the bathroom, and everything that you learn in entrepreneurship, which is like networking, working with people, building relationships, serving others, it's like you have to reprogram yourself. So for most of us, and I would assume your audience is the same, and if not, then God bless them. For most of us, when we first start the journey, we are doing all the things that we were taught in school to make us a good employee, and that doesn't always make you a good entrepreneur. And so when I first started, I wasn't making any money. I was scared to niche down, to pick a certain profession. I was scared to turn away money. Where if somebody asked me to do something, I would say, yes, I'll do it, whatever it is. And then I would give a low number. I would always try to get a yes. And then when you going through the entrepreneurship journey, you slowly realize that you don't need everybody to say yes. That there are very successful companies that are very regional. I know $1 million companies that people don't know them outside of a 20-mile radius. And as a result of entrepreneurship, you start learning. You're like, okay, well, Apple doesn't seem to be bothered by raising their prices. Apple doesn't seem to be concerned with running out of inventory, right? Where you slowly are like, okay. So for me, that first year when I quit, I wasn't making any money. I went to Nigeria with my father-in-law. He had a wedding, and I was like, well, I'm not working, so maybe this is what I should do. Maybe it was a meant to be, like I'm going to learn something over there. And what I learned is if you travel, you should look to see what viruses mosquitoes have, because I got bit by mosquitoes that gave me malaria. And I didn't have health insurance anymore because it was an expense that I thought in my early 20s, well, I'm always healthy. I don't really need to go to the doctor. I can cut off on that. And then I had to go to the doctor. I couldn't pay any of the bills. It was a really rough spot. And then that same year, I ended up tearing my patella tendon, which is the tendon that holds your kneecap in place. And again, I didn't have health insurance. The crazy thing is, outside of that year, before that and after that, I've had no health problems. I paid for my healthcare insurance, never had an issue. But that one year that I first started the company, I had all these bills come due. And as a result, we ended up having to sell our house. We just couldn't keep paying these bills. So I had to sell our house. We had to move into an apartment. I had to pick up a job as a Lyft driver at night so I could try to keep the lights on and support my family. I homeschooled my kids, which was a good thing. I enjoyed doing that, but it was because I couldn't afford to put them in the daycare at that time. So I was trying to have this entrepreneurial journey. I wanted to quit my job to have more time to focus on the business, and I had less time, less money, and I still had to figure out how to reprogram myself from an employee to a business owner. And so that's why I often tell people, make sure you have already gone through that, where you have already reprogrammed your mind. So that way, when you have half of your income already replaced, you've already reprogrammed yourself enough that you should feel comfortable and confident that you can start your business.
Great information. And one thing that you said, because I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs that say, I quit my job, but that health insurance, that it's kind of expensive. I have to pay that out of my pocket now. So let's
Right.
talk about, I mean, because, when I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs that are successful now, they said like that first few years, it was hard. So I really want you to hit that home because I hear so many people, man, my job's great. I make a lot of money, but I want to have a picnic at noon every day. I want to be able to be with my wife and kids, and I don't have to worry about the guy in the cubicle next to me. I don't have to worry about, okay, they're changing our agenda. We're doing 2 or 3 times the work for the same money. But then after you start talking to these brothers and sisters, you're like, ooh. So let's hammer that home a little bit.
Sure. So I think it's important, and I appreciate the advocacy that you're doing to make sure they have eyes wide open. So in the Obsidian Wisdom, we're big on wisdom, where there's knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. And I'll give a simple example where we just talk about baking a cake. So if you have the knowledge, you probably memorize the recipes. You probably read, you know what ingredients, you know it's 2 eggs, some flours, you know all the ingredients. That's the knowledge. That's what most of us have. We have a knowledge of what we're about to do or what we want to do. We may have watched some podcasts, we may have listened and read some books, some videos. We have the knowledge. Understanding is the next level. So understanding when it comes to baking, that would be understanding the ingredients and how they work together, how it causes temperatures to rise and what temperature I should cook it at. Even something as small as recognizing that your oven might cook a little quicker than the recipe's oven. And so the recipe says, hey, take 10 minutes. But every time you use 10 minutes, it burns. And so at some point, you're like, you know what? My oven seems to be a little different. So I have to do something different, right? That's the understanding. You're able to draw conclusions. You don't just have the information and just take orders. You have the comprehension where you can say, you know what? This doesn't always work this way. And then when you put the knowledge and the understanding together, then you level up to wisdom. And wisdom, in the same analogy of baking, that's when your grandma bakes, where your grandma knows the recipes, the ingredients, and she also knows when to not follow the recipe. Grandma can be like, man, don't do that. That is not going to taste right. She knows the quality of the ingredients and how that impacts it. She knows to have her colds and her liquids mixed together first. She knows to leave them at room temperature. She has the ability to consistently get the results of an excellent cake consistently because she has the wisdom now. And when that comes to entrepreneurship or even investing, when I talk to people, we all have the knowledge where we're told certain things. Some of us maybe even know a little bit of the why, but when it comes to synthesizing and putting it all together, that wisdom, that's what I think a lot of us should be waiting for when it comes to starting that entrepreneur journey, where we have to take enough swings at the plate. The knowledge you probably haven't tried, understanding you probably tried at least a couple times. Wisdom is you woke up every day and put in the work. And the thing about entrepreneurship that I think a lot of us mistake is entrepreneurship is about results. So you have to get the results. If a good day for me is scheduling 5 appointments, or a good day for me is putting out 20 pieces of content, it doesn't matter what happened that day. I don't stop until I put out 20 pieces of content or schedule the 5 appointments. When an employee's mindset is, I did a bunch of tasks and I did it for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and I'm done. I was asked to do a task. I did the task. I'm done. Entrepreneurship is about results. So it doesn't matter what you did. I don't care if you subbed it out and had a team of 30 people do it. I don't care if you had to spend 20 hours doing it. I don't care if you bought it. It's about the result. The thing about being an employee is we're often told it's the task that you're doing, that if you just spend the 8 hours, right? That's what we did in school. That's what you do at work, where you read the numbers. It says most people work for 4 hours out of their 8-hour day. It's not like that in entrepreneurship. You're only cheating yourself. And so unless you have gotten rid of that, then it's going to be a really hard journey. And that's what I think makes entrepreneurship so hard those first couple years, it's not necessarily that the task is hard, is that we haven't grown from the knowledge to the understandings of the wisdom, and we aren't measuring the right metrics, where what a successful day looks like for an employee is not what a successful day looks like for an entrepreneur.
Great information. And let's talk about Obsidian Wisdom. You're the president, registered investment advisor, Jacksonville, Florida. Let's talk about that and what was the impetus of that?
Sure. So having worked for three of the largest financial firms, all three top 50 companies, I was able to start realizing certain talents that I had, where we talk about this knowledge and understanding and wisdom, where I was able to start putting some information together. And for me, I'm driven by the idea that, as you mentioned earlier, is that we really should be able to live our life on our own terms. But we all recognize that there's a dollar sign attached to that. There is a cost to living your life on your own terms. And for me, that is the focus that I had, where what we often will hear is, hey, invest in your 401k and your IRA and your Roth and things like that. But when you look at what the most successful people are doing, I don't think you'd be surprised to hear that most of them aren't putting a bunch of money in a 401k. And so, all right, well, what are they doing? And then that was when I basically said, all right, on that, let me step out and offer people those types of solutions. So the IRS says that there's 7 streams of income, right? The one we all know is earned income, but you also have profits from a business. So you have profits, you have interest income. That's what you get when you have your money in a bank, you have your savings, and they give you that 0.01% every so often. You have investment income, which is going to be your dividends. You have royalty income, which is I just have some sort of intellectual property. So the black guy who had invented the super soaker, that technology, was a rocket scientist. He gets paid millions of dollars every year for that invention. He has the royalty on it. He has the patent on that. You have rental income, which is normally going to be a business, which could be real estate, but it also could be equipment in the business. You could load out, heavy machinery and things like that. And then you have capital gains, which is I just have money that's invested in the stock market. And if I leave it for a year and a day, it has a different tax bracket. When I looked at that, I said, okay, the IRS says there's 7 streams of income, and your 401k isn't really focused on many of these streams. And then the other numbers will say that self-made millionaires, 65% of them have one thing in common, that they have at least 3 streams of income. And so I was like, okay, if 65% of self-made millionaires have at least 3 streams of income, then we should be offering solutions to people to be able to do that. So I said, okay, well, how do I achieve financial freedom? And I said, okay, well, the sexy word is financial freedom. The unsexy word is retirement, right? Retirement, it's a French word. It means to withdraw. So we're withdrawing from the workforce so that we're withdrawing from the rat race. We're withdrawing from trading our time for money. And now we're able to trade our money for time and live a life of fulfillment. But you got to have at least 3 streams of income. At least that's what 65% of self-made millionaires have. So that's what the focus of the company. And so there's 3 assets that you can generate these in. One is going to be real estate, 2 is going to be a business, and 3 is going to be the stock market. And these 3 asset classes, you'll be able to build your own retirement, your own financial freedom, and your own generational wealth. But you have to have at least 3 streams within these asset classes.
Our show's about creating generational wealth, but I'm seeing now a lot of, college graduates are moving back home. A lot of those moms and pops are retired. They're like, wait, hold up. Y'all done went to school, created all this debt. Now y'all back in the house. I'm gonna have to go get a job. So when we talk about creating generational wealth, plus we're living in an inflationary economy. So people that may have retired 5 or 10 years ago, this inflation, I've interviewed people. I go in their house Tuesday, Wednesday, the grandkids waking up with bonnets, and I'm like, y'all ain't nobody working in here. No, hey, this black man studies, man. We keep it real on here, man. I don't play no games, but I'm just saying at the end of the day, if I'm setting up my retirement and I'm setting up a financial strategy, how do you include inflation? Because the last thing when I retire, I'm not trying to go back to work, man. I'm trying to do what I want to do. But how do you do that with what if that inflation keeps going up? Like it's to me, the what if is the scary part about retiring.
You bring up an excellent point, and you're really hitting on something I think a lot of us are struggling with when we look at that. Inflation is interesting. So it's the idea that the cost of something goes up, right? I remember as a kid that the price of gas was $1. I remember my dad driving around. We found one for 99 cents or one for $1.03. He would stop at the one for 99 cents. I just remember that. But now it's like 400% higher than that, 500% higher than that. So it's not crazy to have been someone who retired in the 90s who is now paying for gas that's 500% higher than what you have budgeted for in your retirement. Like, that's not crazy. And it really comes down to investing in assets that go up with inflation. I mean, because it's going to happen, but there are certain things that benefit from that. So, for example, the stock market, if you look at it, it goes up with inflation. Real estate goes up with inflation. Businesses, you've bought stuff, their prices go up with inflation. So when you're in those three asset classes that I mentioned to you, they all perform well in inflation, because if I flipped it and you were a business owner and I said, hey, your prices are going to go up 10%, how do you feel about that? Most business owners would say, I feel pretty good about that. I'm raising my prices. I'm making more money for the same product. It's when you think of it from the consumer perspective, which is I'm spending 10% more on something. So if you're able to switch your position to where you're someone who is in real estate, so you're charging rent, well, you can raise the price of rent. So inflation doesn't bother you. If you're in a business, you and I both know, I went and saw the price of milk just the other day. It was like $10 for a gallon of organic milk. And I was like, dang, $10. So if I'm in the business, I can raise my prices with inflation, which means I can keep up with the profits. And then if you're in the stock market has been going up exponentially because businesses are all raising their prices. So it's increasing the value of those particular stocks. And then you can talk about like bonds and US treasuries where they go up. So there's always an asset that you can invest in that helps you. And for a lot of people, when we talk about the what if, it's really, how do I build an investment portfolio that has a lot of those contingencies in place? For most people, when I'm talking, right, economically, we're going to say either you should be protected from economic growth or economic decline. You should either be protected from inflation or deflation. Well, there's assets that perform well in all four of those. So it's really putting together an investment strategy that has you covered in every economic situation.
And let's talk about some terminology. I'm doing some research on you. Wisdometric Framework. What is that?
The wisdom. So I'm big on wisdom. So reading the Bible as a kid, always wisdom. We read about Solomon, and I would sit there and listen to my parents read, and I'd be like, man, how cool was that he could have anything he wanted, and he wished for wisdom, and it looks like his wish more or less was like wishing for more wishes, where he was able to get an infinite number of wishes because of that. And the way I would describe wisdom, or at least in Solomon's perspective, he was a king on day one. And he was like, I got an old kingdom, a very successful kingdom. Help me to be a better king. So he asked for wisdom. Well, wisdom is like the word in the Bible means experience and insight. All right, insight. So basically, what you would take from that is God gave Solomon the wisdom of 100-year on the throne king. So then it's not day one for him, it's day, 100-year in a day. So all of a sudden he's seen it all, he's been through it all, and he can solve any of these issues, which makes anyone a successful king. We often joke and say, energy is wasted on the youth or something like that, because we know as we get older, as you're going through the game of life, you're like, man, if I could play this game all over again, I'd kill it, because I know all the mistakes that I made, and I know what I should have and could have done. If I could do it all over again, I would crush it. So the Wisdometric Framework is basically that idea. It's saying, all right, there's certain patterns that we can all recognize in the world. We know things like gravity, and we know up and down. We know things like wind patterns, the way the sun rises and sets. Well, when you think of it from the next level, there's also certain patterns in economics. There's certain patterns in investments that we know when inflation goes up, that the Fed raises the interest rates, so that way people spend less, and then companies get rid of employees and they lose their jobs. And then as people spend less, demand goes down, and then eventually the prices go back down, right? That's a pattern. And if you recognize the pattern, then you can say, all right, I know that this is what's going to happen next. Just like we know right now, the Fed's already done that. So what's the next pattern? Well, the Fed's idea is we have to find what's called a soft landing, a very fancy way of saying that we don't want to go into a depression. We just want to stop the red hot economic growth that's causing inflation. So at some point, they're going to start raising rates again, which then makes money more accessible, which would then be an excellent time for someone who's starting a business. You're going to get very low interest rates. It'd be a great time to refinance your house. You're going to be very low interest rates. And so if you know these patterns, you can then say, I'm just going to wait for that. When you read about Warren Buffett and different ones like that, where it says they're holding billions of dollars in cash, what are they waiting for? That's what they're waiting for. They know those patterns. So when you say, all right, I'm going to identify the patterns. So the W in wisdom, we'll run it back. The W in wisdom is a winner's philosophy. And that is just recognizing that the things that we believe has a significant impact on us. And a simple way to say it is someone who's a bodybuilder has a different relationship with food than someone who weighs 700 pounds. Someone who weighs 700 pounds probably eats food for an emotional support. Someone who's a bodybuilder eats food just for the nutrients of their body. They just want to replenish their muscles. So your relationship with money has an impact on how much you have and what you do with it. If you're someone who has a poverty mindset, then you're going to be uncomfortable following a lot of these different strategies because in the back of your mind, you're wondering if it's going to work, if there's going to ever be any more money. But wealthy people, that's not a concern of theirs. They know money flows. They know that I have to put the money somewhere. And if I leave it in a savings account, the bank's going to do something with it that I could do myself. The bank's going to loan it out. The bank's going to do investments. So why couldn't I do that for myself? So the W is the winner's philosophy. The I is identifying the patterns. The S is structuring your finances, which is you got to know where the money's at. It's like a GPS. You would never get in a car and just drive somewhere. You have to know where you're going and you got to know where you're at. That's what a GPS does. It says where we're at to where we're going. And that's all structuring your finances are. I know we don't like hearing about the budgeting, but whether you're going to start a business or you want to keep track of your family's business, then you have to keep track of the money. Where are we spending it? Where's our blind spot? Do we spend too much on our kids? Do we spend too much on food? If you don't know where your money's going, you're going to have a blind spot. The D is my favorite. That's designing your dream life. And that's this idea that I have a bunch of goals listed out and we should have a dollar that it costs. We shouldn't just say I want to have a bunch of money because we're going to feel comfortable. We should know how much we need. If you want to join a golf club, how much does that cost? 10,000, 20,000 a year? How much does that mean we need to make? How much do we need to invest? You want to take a trip with your family? What does that look like? Is that 3,000? Is it 5,000? Is it 10,000? Put a number on everything. And then we know exactly how much your dream life costs. And then we can now put a plan to achieve that. The O is optimizing with systems. And it just means that, look, you and I, we have things that we want to do, and sometimes we forget to do it. But what if we can automate things? We can optimize it where it's always going to happen because it's not requiring a person to pull the lever. And the M is just modeling the successful. And you'll often hear me describe things with percentages because that's how we know it works, right? When I say 65% of self-made millionaires have at least 3 streams of income, then you know that that's something that we can take to the bank. That is a factual number. Now, when I also say, hey, 70% of people 65 and older have at least one long-term care episode. And long-term care just means your ability basically to take care of yourself, right? Wash yourself, go to the bathroom, things like that. Well, to me, that means that that's something we should also prepare for, that could ruin your generational wealth. You may have all the money that you in the world, but you didn't plan for declining health. And then we call that reverse generational wealth, which means you're sucking all of the generational wealth into your last years of retirement. And now you don't have anything to pass on. The worst of that is if possibly your children have to give you money because you didn't plan for any of those situations. And so that's what wisdom is. It's really taking that insight and all that information to put what is the most optimal plan and the highest percentage of success in place.
So we talking about, creating generational wealth. I've had brothers on that say, you know what, if you just want to be a millionaire, just get a life insurance policy. You straight, just do that. But then I've had brothers say, get some real estate. But with this inflation, with the rates, I mean, my rate, I got my house almost in like 2.93% was lovely. 2018 was sweet. I'm hearing almost 9%. I'm in Orlando, Florida, man. It ain't cheap out here. But how can you achieve generational wealth with the rates are so high? And then I read this article this morning. And I'm going to quote the article. It says the homeownership rate gap between Black and white Americans was the same in 2020 as it was in 1970, 2 years after the passage of the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Let's talk about that, brother.
Man, that's tough. That's tough to hear. The same set. Wow. So it's one of those things. So what I normally would say is, hey, how long is generational wealth for you? And most people say, yeah, that's going to be 100 years. Okay, well, do you think there's going to be inflation over that 100 years? Most people would say yes. And do you agree that there's someone who has achieved generational wealth who is still managing it through these inflationary times? And again, most people would agree with that. So when we have that as our base, now it just becomes finding the person who has already figured out how to do it, because we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's already people that are working through inflation very well. There's two schools of thoughts. And so the first school of thought is, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait until rates go back down. I know that there's an economic cycle. I know that we have economic growth that will eventually peak, and then we know we'll have economic decline, which will then have the trough, and the trough is normally a recession, and the peak is normally, economic growth. So if I know that this is the cycle and it's always going to happen, then it's just really saying, well, maybe I'll wait for the rates to go down, which I'm okay with that. The other one would be saying, all right, well, I know that the rates for my investment properties were going to be higher anyways. You're only going to get the lower rates for your primary home. You were going to get the higher rates for your secondary and your investment properties just because it has more risk. You don't actually live there. So if something happened, you would still have the house to live in. So the bank knows that. So they charge you a higher rate for your investment properties. So then I would say, well, for me, the way I normally think about it is not as much what you're paying out as much as what it's paying in, right? So what you're making. And I'll give an example of it. If I was to have a Lamborghini, I think we would all be comfortable with me saying it's worth $100,000, right? Just probably more than that, but let's just say 100,000 to make my life easy. And I'm selling it for $10,000. You don't really care what the interest rate the bank is going to give you, because you know that you're going to get an asset that is going to perform whatever that interest rate is. And so then it becomes, all right, well, that just means I have to have a strategy of how to use this investment that outperforms whatever I'm being charged for it, which is how the wealthy think about things. It's not as much about the cost, it's as much about what I'm doing with the investment. If I'm going to, even if it was a 2% rate, but I'm only have a 1% opportunity, well, you still lost money. You're still paying out more in fees than you're making in revenue. But if I have a 10% cost and I was going to make a 30% return, well, you're still winning. And so for a lot of the times when we talk about inflation and things like that, for me, it's like, okay, that just means we have to find something that generates you a return higher than whatever that rate is. And if you don't have a strategy in place, then I would say there's no reason to go into it. If we can't beat the terms of the mortgage or the loan, then there's nothing to do, right? Same with a business loan. If you have a business idea that you know is going to make you millions of dollars, you don't really care what they charge you. Go to a loan shark and pay whatever they're going to charge you, because we know deep down I'm going to make the return. Now, the other question, which is, hey, I think we can go and get a life insurance policy for $1 million and then we're all millionaires. I don't subscribe to that, right? I have personally $1 million policy on me. My wife has one on her, and our kids are in a good spot. But is that the equivalent of cash flowing $1 million? Is that the equivalent of investing and having these assets and generational wealth? And I would say no. And it goes back to the wisdom. If I give someone a bag of money, does that guarantee that they're going to do something wise with it? Well, of course not. The numbers show that 60-70% of millionaires, or 60-70% of people who win the lottery, go broke within 3 years. Broke within 3 years. More money than they ever had in their life. Broke within 3 years. Why? Because they only have basically let's say a middle class mindset. So they only know what to do with the money that someone who makes $50,000 a year could do with the money, which is why I like the idea of actually figuring out how to generate the millions of dollars a year, because then you can teach your children that, and then your children are able to actually build generational wealth. Right now the numbers show generational wealth is gone on average. It's called a 3-year curse. And it just means about 70 to 90%, depends what study you look at, says generational wealth is gone within 3 years. The idea is my kids saw me do it, right? So I figured it out. So I'm first generation. My kids watched me do it. So they understand it. So they're second generation. Their kids have always been rich. So they have no idea what the struggle was. They have no idea what I learned. And my kids didn't do a good job of conveying that to them. So the third generation wasted. And so for me, you can't say, well, I have $1 million life insurance policy. I'm positive that my kids are going to be successful and I built generational wealth. Not without you instilling the wisdom that they know what to do with the money. Do they know how to evaluate a business? Do they know how to find the property location? Can they do the analysis? Do they know how to look at the cash flows of a property to know if that's going to work for them? Can they read the stock market financials and statements? Can they really do that? And if the answer is no, then they're going to have to lean on someone else, which is then a 50-50 coin toss. If you didn't teach them how to find a proper advisor, then they may be taken advantage of very quickly, and then it's gone.
Wow, that's great information. And when we talk about real estate, when we talk about inheritances, I can count on one hand the number of Black people that get an inheritance or the family members pass the house down. But then on the flip side of that, like, I'm gonna put myself out there. My family from up north, New York. So, they rented their whole lives. So there was no house to get. But when I moved to Florida, that's one thing I did love. Like when I married my wife and I see their family in West Palm, family in Jacksonville, Tallahassee, the whole state of Florida. A lot of the Black folks in the South own, even in Virginia, a lot of the Black families own properties that get passed down to the kids. But here's the problem with that. What I do see a lot of is the minute that person passes away, they clean the house out and they sell it. Let's talk about that.
Man, that's tough. That's tough, Corey. And I see that. I see that. I remember there was this older Black gentleman, and he had a trophy making company, and so he had some contracts with the schools, and he would make trophies for the different schools and their events. And he wanted to sell, or he wanted to pass his business down to his children, and they were not interested in it. And I hear that all the time, where the kids, they're not interested in the business, they're not interested in the property. They think it's a hassle, it's an expense. The even more painful experiences I hear about is people losing family property, acres, dozens of acres, because they didn't pay $2,000 in taxes every year, where it's like crazy stuff that's going on. When I sit back and I say, okay, well, where's the disconnect? And it really comes down to us instilling in our kids the value of these properties, what the plan is. I think a big part of generational wealth isn't just giving the bag of money, because if that's all we had to do, then nobody would be filing bankruptcy. But we know that there's more to it than that. And so whether it's your kids working in the business with you, whether it's you asking them for their insights, we have to have where the kids feel invested in it. And so when it comes to the property, maybe we need to give them other options. Sometimes they just don't know what options are available, where in their mind, they're like, well, I'm not going to live there. I moved. I got a family over here. Well, it's going to be too much of a hassle. How about I just sell it and just be done with it? Or, I never liked that house, or whatever the things are that people are thinking about. It really comes down to us making sure our kids understand the value of what they have, because on the other end, when we talk about, gentrification, what we're basically saying is that there are Black people who had a neighborhood and they didn't see the value of that property, and they weren't taught how to take that opportunity and to grow it into something else. And so all they saw was an expense. And then someone else came in and saw the opportunity, and then they flipped it. And so we just want to make sure that our kids understand. That's what I try to teach my kids. I try to teach my kids that value is relative, right? Like if I go in the stock market every day, it's going to have a new offer on any particular company. So their value fluctuates. But I have to know what the value is to me, and I have to hold firm to that I can't just go around accepting any of these offers, because you get offers all the time. So it's this old story with the watch. So what happened is the grandfather said, all right, well, take the watch to the pawn shop. And the kid took the watch to the pawn shop and they said, okay, we'll give you $20 for it. And then he came back, he told his grandfather, hey, they offered me $20. He said, well, now take the watch to the jewelry store. He took the watch to the jewelry store and the guy, he looked at it, he cleaned it off. He'd offered him a couple $100. He's like, dang, grandpa, I got $200 now. And he said, well, now take the watch to an antiquer. And the antiquer looked at the watch and offered him $2,000. And so you got $20 to $2,000, but it comes down to whether the kid knows the value of the watch, because he may have sold it for the 20. It meant nothing to him. And I think that's what a lot of families are doing, where the home or the business doesn't mean a lot to them, so they sell it to the first person. But if you show your kids the value of it and you show them that other people who also know the value of it exist, well, then your kid maybe will hold on to it. And that's what I think we have to be able to do, is we have to show our kids the value of what it is that we have. That's not an expense, it's not a burden, that it is an asset. It's very valuable, and it's something that you should be proud of, that our family holds on to.
Are you enjoying yourself on Black Men Sundays?
I love these conversations. They're necessary conversations. I think you ask incredible questions, Corey, that really gets at the heart of what I think we're all trying to figure out. And so I think you're doing a service to your audience, because you're putting yourself in their shoes and asking them the questions that I think everybody wants to know the answer to.
I wouldn't be doing my due diligence if I didn't ask you this question, man. So typically, I'm the Christmas man. Like November, December, I'm the guy. Swipe that credit card, got the Jared card, the Chase. You swipe, 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 and then typically for me, I'm like the Black Al Bundy, January through March. I'm like, oh, don't ask me for nothing. No, I'm paying these cards down. But then this year, I got a surprise in the mail from one of my credit cards. It said, hey, Corey, thanks for being a valued customer. I'm thinking, am I getting a limit increase? They said, no, you're getting a rate increase. That's,
oh, wow.
After I done Christmas shop.
Right.
So that March, I'm still paying those cards down. So like, what financial tips from a credit card perspective can you give when you get that in the mail from your credit card company and the rates are going up? Is that something where I should say, thank you, I'm good? Should I just pay it off and not use it anymore? Should I close the account? Like, what advice would you have? Because I feel like for me, that credit card now, like I had that card like 5-6 years. Wasn't a big deal. $100, $200. Now those minimums, $400-$500. I had one $800. I'm $800. You crazy? You killing me. So let's talk about that.
That's a real question. So Albert Einstein, and I can't quote him exactly, but he basically says compounding interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He said, he who understands it earns it, he who doesn't pays it. And so when we look at credit cards, it's one of those things that's very complicated, right? So if it's an old credit line, then it's going to have a pretty significant negative impact if you closed it. If it's a newer credit line, then I would say pay it off and get rid of it. But then also, a part of your credit score is tied to this thing called your credit utilization, which is a very fancy way of saying, what percentage of my available credit am I using? And what we'll do is you and I would say, okay, if I have someone with $1,000 credit limit and they have $900 in loans, then you would say, okay, well, that's $900, but that's a 90% utilization. They're using $900 of their available $1,000 versus someone who has $100,000 of available credit and they have $10,000 in debt. They only are using 10% of their available credit. So from the credit card company's perspective, the person with $10,000 of credit card debt is actually a safer investment than the person with $900 of credit card debt. You and I would say, I don't think that makes sense. The person has 10 times more debt than the next person. How could they be the safer investor? The idea is because they're managing their money better. So if this card is a high part of your credit utilization, where if you close that account, it increases your utilization above 30%. That's about the normal magic number. If it increases it above 30%, then you probably should leave it open, because it's going to show you as a higher risk. And what companies do when they see that is they'll either lower your limits. Some of them will close the account out where basically you just pay down the balance, but you're not allowed to actually put anything else on it. Some of them will increase the rates, as you had just mentioned. And so as a result, when there's certain portfolios that we get grouped in, from the investment perspective, they say that makes us a higher risk asset. And as a result, they want a higher return. You and I, if we were giving money to a grade A company, we would expect probably not to get as much than if we gave money to someone with like a grade F company, like a penny stock. We know that there's high risk in that, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, all that stuff. There's high risk in that. So a lot of people are trying to get those higher returns from that. But when you invest in stable companies like Apple or Google, well, we're not super surprised that there maybe isn't as high of a return because that's a very stable, safe investment. You are your own company from the perspective of the credit card companies, and they reevaluate each of us on a regular basis. How much credit are we using? Whether that makes us a safe or a less safe investment. How do we pay? Are we just paying the minimums? Are we paying more than the minimums? They look at all of this and they are able to say, okay, this person is a high risk bucket, this person is a low risk bucket, and then they change it out. So if it for in your situation, if my credit utilization is still below 30%, and it's not one of my oldest cards because that's a part of your risk profile is saying, all right, Corey, his oldest account is 15 years old. This is a very stable guy, very safe guy. But if you close that account and now your oldest card is maybe 10 years old, it's a different look. So that's what I would look at making that decision. Now that's the the financial ABC perspective. Sometimes I just don't like you. I don't like that you treated me that way. I've been with you for a while and you mistreated me. I'm gonna close the account and I'm gonna deal with whatever happens after that because I'm not gonna let you treat me that way. Right? That's the real perspective because we're all humans at the end of the day. So we don't have to make necessarily the right calculation, the right calculation. We can make what feels right. And I think that that is a part of it where it's like, you know what? I pay the cards. I've always paid it. I've done the same thing. And you're going to mistreat me this way. I'm going to find somewhere else to do my business.
On the bottom of the letter, after it said that it was going to increase the rate, it says if you would like to close the account, you can do that, but you just pay the balance off. And like I said, I Christmas shop pretty good, so I'm a little over 30%. We're gonna be all the way honest out here, but sometimes I wake up 4 in the morning, I'm financially stressed out. I'm like, man, that minimum, I don't have that. I'm gonna have to not pay a bill to pay that. I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? But at the same time, if I don't pay it, then next month that 800 turn to 1600, that 400 turn to 800, that 200 turn into 400. It's like I feel like I'm going backwards. Where 5 years ago I was like, oh, this is cookies, 200 here, 100 here, not a big deal. Paid my bills was easy. Now I'm like, well, that stress anxiety is real, man. It's real. So what can we do going forward now? What can we do as black men, people of color? Even though I hate that terminology. Because it reminds me of colored people, people of color, colored people. What to me, that's the same thing. It's just a nicer way of putting it. But it's black men such we keep it real in here. But my question for you before I let you get out of here, brother, is when we talk about financial stress, like I said, sometimes I wake up 4 in the morning, just, I'm just calculator in my brain is just rocking. I'm like, man, go back to sleep. You don't even got to get up till 8. You up. But what can we do to alleviate that? I mean, obviously, the $1,000,000 answer for everyone always says, make more money, pay the balances down. But when you're in that grind and those limits ain't $100 no more, it's a challenge to pay that down. So what can we do to alleviate some of that?
Man, that's something that we're all dealing with inflation, especially. The numbers show that about 55% of middle class is leaning on credit cards, that they just can't afford their lifestyle anymore, and that our credit cards as a country in the United States is now over $1 trillion, which is the highest amount it's been. And so a lot of us are dealing with this. I think the numbers show 55, 60% of people say they have stress about money, so that they don't necessarily go into the details, whether it's paying a mortgage or car, paying credit cards, but they have stress around money. And so for most of the stress, I would look at it from the perspective of I'm right. Like I'm right. There is something that I'm not quite wrapping my hands around. And the way I would describe it is you and I, if we were asked to walk on a tightrope, we would probably be like, nah, I'm okay. But at the same time, we can acknowledge that there's someone who works at the circus who has been working for the circus for 20 years, who walks on the tightrope every week, who could jump up, walk across the tightrope, no problem, don't even think twice about it. So sometimes the confidence or the lack of confidence, the discomfort that we have, sometimes it is because we haven't really put a plan in place and we haven't really enacted that plan on a consistent basis. And so for me, we want to really sit down and look at the numbers. So right, that's the structuring the finances and wisdom. We'll really take a step back and we look at everything we got, and then we try to figure out, is there somewhere that we can make an adjustment? And it doesn't have to be overnight. It doesn't have to be a 1 year strategy, but it should be a plan that we feel confident is going to work out, even if it's 5 years, even if it's 10 years, that we feel really good about. For me, I think most people, you can put a 2, 3 year plan into place and you can get rid of your debt. For most people, you can. And so for me, I would say let's put the debt elimination plan in place. But at the same time, I really love the idea of getting good financial habits. So even if you only put $2 in an investment, I think it's just good to build the habit of having your money go towards making you more money. I just think that that's something that we often don't really wrap our mind around, which is I don't know what to do with my money, which is part of the reason that I spend it on this stuff, because I don't really know what else. I don't really know what to do with it. I don't know where to invest. I don't know, how to really do it. They say the 401k, but those fees are kind of high. People say real estate, they say businesses, but I don't know how to evaluate it. I would say, just start putting your money, even if it's in an index fund in the S&P 500, just start building that habit of saying, I'm going to put some of my money in a bank account, even if it's $1, even if it's $5, even if it's $10. So that way you just start building the habit. I'm big on percentages. So if you have about your overall budget, let's say you live on 70%, let's say 20% is going towards your debt, 10% is going to the church. I'd say, okay, well, we got everything allocated. We may have to say, well, let's have 15% go towards that and 5% goes towards me and buying my financial freedom. I think we just underestimate what we can do in 5 years and we overestimate what we can do in 1 year. And so once you start having that 5% going towards something, you may actually be able to have money from your investments help pay some of your other debt. And now you're like, okay, because for most people, we always talking about the $1 million of generational wealth, and I appreciate that. I put the plans together. But for a lot of people, if you could just have an extra $1,000 a month that your money generates, how would that change your life? And most people are like, man, that would change the game. $2,000, most people's mortgages are paid. Imagine if you don't have to pay your mortgage with your active income. Most people would say that's a game changer. So sometimes we just got to really get our head out the cloud and say, okay, let me put a plan in place to just generate 1,000, 2,000 a month. And it may take 5 years, but in 5 years, I have $2,000 being generated. How many people can say that? Most people can't say that. So why are we sneezing at 5 years? Most people can't say that, and they've been working for 30 years. So if you could put a 5 year plan in place, now your mortgage is paid by money working. Well, now you can pay off the debt. Now you can enjoy your life a little bit more. And you really can take a step back and say, this is working, which then gives you the confidence, what we go back to with our tightroper, to say, I know what to do with my money, and I'm buying my freedom every day.
The first thing that I saw when I went to your LinkedIn page, it says focus on retiring in the next 5 years. I've had brothers come on the show. They said, okay, just give me $1,200, $1,500 a month. We can get you going. But for me, I'm like, man, I got a mortgage to pay. I got them high credit cards I just told you about. I don't have no 1,500 just to retire in five. I mean, it'd be nice, but let's talk about that. And then also, you're an author, you're a speaker. And I see you have the retirement training videos. How can brothers, connect with you?
I appreciate you, Corey. I'm thankful for your time. So for me, I'm big on just starting. I'm big on habits. I'm big on wisdom. So you've heard in the conversations. For me, don't let the number throw you off, right? And when we throw big numbers around, when you really break it down, we know that if I could just have $500 generated from side income, investments, things like that, even if you can't afford an active advisor, I have, and you can follow me on YouTube, where I have the Wealthy Retirement. You can go to obsidianwisdom.com. I put out content every week where I give you all my jewels, because my thought is, if I give you everything, and when you generate the revenue, you're probably gonna come to me. You're probably like, well, Dre helped me get me here, so I trust him. He can help me. So as far as getting started, you don't want to necessarily pay an advisor, but put $5. If you do that, there's numbers out there where literally, if you were investing over 10 years, so I'll just give you the number. Someone from 25 to 35 invested $5,000 every single year, and then they got an 8% return. That person would have more money at 60 than someone who started at 35, invested $5,000 from 35 to 60. And so you invested From 35 to 60, significantly more, same 8% return, but the person who started earlier beat you. So time is always on our side. So don't wait till you have the money right to do what you already know, which is you got to start investing your money in assets that generate you a return so that you can stop trading your time for money and start buying back your time. And those three assets is the stock market, real estate, and business ventures. If you aren't necessarily proficient in any of those, where you're like, Dre, I'm not ready for real estate, because while real estate is great in the sense that I can leverage my money, you're also, once you're leveraged, means you owe more than what you had, right? And we don't talk about that as much. And what that means is if you had $100,000 and you generally put 20% down, that means you could, if you had like $1 million, well, not $1 million, but let's say you had like $100,000 house, 20% of that is $20,000. So you technically could buy 5 houses for $100,000 because you put the 20% down, which is great if everything works out. The problem is if it doesn't work out, you are now on the hook for $500,000, even though you only had $100,000 to start with. So everybody isn't going to just go out and start leveraging their money, because you can find yourself in the rock and the hard place. Same with businesses, where you go and buy a business and you don't realize the inventory, the staff, these taxes, workers' comp, and all this other stuff. Well, you might be in a rock and a hard place. If you aren't proficient in either of those, I tell people to start in the stock market. And the reason is because it has the lowest barrier of entry. You can put $1 in, you can put $5 in, you can have it in a cash account, and then every time it gets to $100, you buy a stock. And then you put it in the cash account, every time it gets to another 100, you buy another stock. And if you put $5 a day, which is probably about like 150 a month, so maybe 75 from each check, I find that you're basically able to put this plan together, right? In 10 months, you have over $1,000. I already told you the majority of Americans can't say they have access to $1,000 liquid. So you're already above the majority of Americans just by putting $5 a day in an investment account. And then you just keep doing that. And then once you're building and have the momentum, sure, we can then talk about ways to diversify and different strategies. But for most people, right, as the old saying, right, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. If you want to build generational wealth, if you want your children to be able to sit under a tree that's shaded because they know you planted it, then you got to put the seed in the ground today. And whatever that looks like, $5 a month, $10 a month, that's fine, because eventually you'll get a raise. And don't income creep, which is a very fancy way of saying I make more, I spend more. 3% raise, put 1.5 towards your investments, 1.5 towards getting rid of your debt. And I'll tell you that if you do that, and you do that for 3 years, you're going to be out of debt. Most people will. Obviously, there's one-offs, but most people will be out of debt.
Well, there you have it, man. Wow. Great show. I could easily go for another hour, easy, but I'm not going to do that. It's Sunday. Dre Griggs, man. Thanks for coming on Black Men Sundays. Jacksonville, Florida, from West Palm Beach, educated at Florida State and Georgia Southern University. Gave us some terminology today. We learned. So I think the number one thing that I got from this, man, is I'm going to make sure I don't quit my day job. I'm going to let my day job finance my entrepreneurial adventures, which we're doing with Black Men Sundays. Because with Black Men Sundays, it's not just a podcast. We do community initiatives. We're also a LLC. We're a business. So we take donations, contributions, and we give them back in the community, man. So, but once again, man, thanks for all your financial advice. Just thanks for coming on Black Men Sundays, brother. I'm glad you had a good time, and we definitely gonna have to have you back in the future. I'm gonna stay connected with you, brother.
Definitely, Corey. I appreciate you having me on. I love what you guys are doing, and is needed. Everybody, just make sure you stay connected with Corey. Obviously, you hear things. And you're going to hear, and you mentioned it, Corey, sometimes you'll be like, well, dang, one person said this, one person said that. And I would say that's the beauty. You get to decide what makes the most sense for you. And so just figure out where to get started. Don't overthink. Take small action, but take action.
It's a Black Man Sunday. Time to put all childish things away.